Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Woodall. I am an autism teacher. I work with students who are in high school in Clovis, California. This is my first year teaching in California, but before this I worked for 6 years with students with disabilities, some of those students with autism. So I'm not new to the area, to the field of autism, but to the area in California I am, which has prompted me to take this course. So getting right into it, the characteristics of autism are show up in areas of social skills, behaviors, speech, and communication. And autism affects 1 in 44 children, and it has become much more common over, I'd say, the last 10 years or so, where now we're seeing it a lot more, and we're able to, really support students with autism spectrum disorder in general education settings or in, various special education settings, much more than we were at the beginning of the diagnosing phase. So autism shows up in a few different ways. The first is cognitive and neurological. This can be seen in executive functioning or planning. And for our high-functioning students who are in either our gifted and talented programs or maybe in our general education settings, they might need support in with a organizer or with a planner or with a checklist or something of that sort, just making sure that they're able to get through all of the tasks that they need to. Maybe they need alarms set for them or reminders set up and different supports like that. On the lower end of the spectrum, where I'm teaching currently, my students need first then boards or simple visual schedules with 3 steps on them. First, we're going to do our math, and then we're going to take a break with a bike ride. First, we're going to do our bike ride, then we're going to lunch. Always having like a next step of what's coming so that the student can plan for it. Also, having that visual for our lower functioning students is really helpful because that gives them a visual cue to get them either emotionally ready to face whatever task is at hand, or also to begin to gather the materials that they need. Okay, if I see that math is the icon on my schedule, I know that I'm going to need my workbook and my pencil, or I know that I have to go over and take out my task bins, or whichever it is. There's a very cause and effect way that autism works, and if we can draw on that as educators, we can help the planning and facilitating of that much more easily. The next thing is memory. Memory is such a strength for our students with autism. I was just watching one video of how an educator used memory as a facilitative exercise within their classroom and allowed students to have free choice, and that was so awesome to see. If we're able as educators to draw on student strengths regardless of what we're teaching, if we're teaching general education science or if we're teaching students with autism, you always want to draw on student strengths. Memory is a huge strength for our students with autism. Flexibility or rigidity is also another characteristic of autism. We are constantly teaching flexibility. So our planners, once we have the plan and we know what to expect, having a change in that plan is really difficult sometimes to manage. And that leads us into our next characteristic of emotional regulation. So those are some difficulties or some deficits in the area of autism. But emotional regulation actually ties nicely into the behavior and sensory characteristics that we're going to talk about next. For behavior and sensory, they are a little bit in the same area, but also very different. Our sensory characteristics, if not met or if overloaded, can turn into behaviors. But typical Now, autism behaviors are self-stimulatory behaviors, which is like, wiggling our fingers in front of our eyes, or flapping our hands, or walking on our tippy toes. Or ritualistic behaviors of lining up things, or making sure that everything is done the exact same way every single time. Right now I have a student who has to circle the correct answer exactly the right way every single time, and if it's not, we cannot move on. It needs to be the exact same circle for every answer. For circling C, the circle needs to be perfect. So I know that he needs to take a little bit more time with that, so he has extra time to do that. And the last typical behavior or characteristic for this area is sensory overload or deprivation. And so this is where if maybe a student is craving sensory input, or they're overwhelmed by the sensory input. So as educators, we make sure that our environments are really sensory sensitive. So we don't have a ton of stuff all over our walls. We have things nicely organized. We have things, in simple patterns, simple colors, simple, just visually simple. That gives us the opportunity to increase visual sensory if needed. So if a student is craving that visual sensory, they can watch videos and have a more visually rich environment if needed. We can always add. Taking away the sensory input when overloaded and having a hard time regulating can be really hard. We want to avoid reaching that threshold if possible. Other sensory areas are vestibular input, or where our students learn about where their body is within their environment. So movement is huge in this, swinging, spinning, that sort of thing. My students right now love bike rides, most of them. Other students love the swing or the rocker chairs or the bean bags or the ball chairs instead of our regular chairs. I try to provide as much movement opportunities for my students as possible so that they can decide to take advantage of them if they need to. Our last area of typical characteristics for people with autism is in the way of communication and social skills. So this can really easily be recognized by echolalia, or the repetition, or the lack of facial expressions that match maybe the emotion that you're suspecting a student is feeling, and the inability to either regulate emotions or recognize an emotion. So, these kind of cross over from cognitive and neurological to communication skills and social skills, behavior and sensory. It's all one, because it's all one person. So saying that they are only coming from one specific area is not necessarily entirely, the full picture. It's, yes, we do see deficits in the way of social skills, and we can work towards those. But if we have a sensory issue going on, or we have a neurological issue going on, then it's only just showing its face in the social skills or behavior area. It's not necessarily the primary concern for the deficit right away. So, as educators of students with autism spectrum disorder, we can 100% know that we are going to explicitly teach social skills, whether it be in turn taking and waiting, or whether it be in, checking with a student, was that appropriate to say, or was that something we should just keep in our head? Or if it's, facilitating conversation through high interest conversations or topics of interest between two different students. It's having the student cross beyond their comfort zone to, draw inferences, make inferences about how someone else might be feeling. This is not some stuff that comes naturally and easily to our people with autism spectrum disorder. So as an educator, we can plan on explicitly teaching in those areas. The setting and environment and the environmental supports that we put in as educators are so important to our people with autism spectrum disorder. My classroom is, really just in line with sensory. So I have light filters on my fluorescent lights. I know that those can be really bothersome, and the noise on top of that can be really impactful for our students with autism. I have alternative seating options for our kiddos. We have different tangible things that students might need, whether it be fidgets or different slimy things for touching, or bubbles for our visual stimulation, or noise-canceling headphones just available for students to take if they need. I have as much sensory stuff as I can find, read about, research, or get suggested to me. If I hear about it, I want it. I want it available for my kids to try. Schedules are also really important. I have a schedule for every single student because I know that they do better with it. So not only do they have a schedule, they also have a token economy system. So we always check in. What are you working for? And what do you need to do now to get you to where you want to be? So most of my students work for technology. They either want a computer or they want an iPad. But if that's not available to them at the time or during that day, then they can choose from a bunch of other things, either a walk with a preferred teacher, or to a preferred location, or doing some sort of sensory activity that they want to do if they want to do more of that aside from their proactive sensory diets. They always know what they're on track to work for, and they always know what's coming up next. And that's really important for my students specifically. And I know it's helpful for all people, in fact, but specifically our people with autism spectrum disorder. And the last thing is any anticipatory change that's going to happen, whether it be a field trip or a testing day or a change in weather or anything like that. We try to discuss all of the changes that are going on within our environment or that we might feel impacted by regularly. We check in, we have a calendar marked with special events. If we have a student birthday coming up, we know that we're going to get to order pizza on that day. Not all students eat pizza, but they can expect to smell pizza that day and see pizza and have the opportunity to have it if they want to. We're going to have cake. There's going to be balloons. We try to make all celebrations very specific and systematic. So we know when we're celebrating, we know what the celebration looks like, and we know what we can do if the celebration is too much for us in that moment. We always have choices. So if it's too much, I need you to use your words. Let me know, whether it be a communication device or your actual verbal words. Let me know and you can take a break. And this was a really good strategy even for my higher functioning students when I was teaching different students back in New York. Sometimes things are just overwhelming, for all people in general, but just remembering or reminding our students that they have a choice, that they can either take part in whatever's happening or they can take a break and come back to it, and that's okay too. So remembering that the break strategy is so useful and important, because there are going to be times when our people with autism are overwhelmed, and if they can know that they can take a break and return, then that's really comforting for our people with autism. And here are our references. And that is all for my presentation on the characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. Thank you. Bye-bye.